Hey, what is indigenous? Why do I call myself a shaman? I had some friends visit the other day and we talked about becoming indigenous and this whole story that I'm putting forward. And I wanted to address this thing that I think comes up a lot when people hear about what I'm saying. Is like, how can you say that we can become indigenous? Isn't that something you're just born with? How can I call myself a shaman when I wasn't born in some indigenous community who's lived for hundreds of years of tradition in this way? How can I just call myself that? Well, I think I first want to talk about the definition of indigenous. Now, many words can have many different definitions, and so that's always a tricky thing, especially in this time, to figure that out. Now, I make a distinction between indigenous and native, which is often used interchangeably. And this comes from really quotes that I heard and talks that I heard from Native American indigenous people who defined indigenous as having a sacred connection to the land, a sacred connection to the land that you live on, having a spiritual connection to the earth, a spiritual connection to our planet that we live on, a spiritual connection to nature. That is what I understand as a basic definition of what indigenous means. And I think it is very important for this beautiful planet that humans form that connection again. And it is also important that we recognize and respect the indigenous peoples who have had their long traditions of maintaining that connection. I mean, this channel is all about learning from those indigenous peoples. This is absolutely what I want to encourage. And this is, I try to learn from indigenous peoples that have those long-standing traditions and bring those messages forward. And I think it is really important that we as Westerners, people born in the city, born outside of these cultural traditions, that we too step back into our connection, which a long time ago our ancestors on the same land had too. That we step back into that spiritual connection, that sacred relationship with nature, with the earth. And if we hold on to the idea that indigenous is something you can only be born with, and that this is only something that people who natively lived in uncivilized places, if you want to call civilization a place of cities, if we hold on to the idea that only those people can be indigenous, and that you can only be indigenous if you were born into a community and into a already existing culture that already lives that way, well, then what is the consequence? The consequence of that would be that we have hundreds of millions of people living in broken city-based civilizations that are collapsing, corrupting, and that are destroying nature. And because we say, well, you can't be indigenous, you can't just become indigenous, well then, if we hold on to that idea, then it won't happen, will it? Then that sacred connection between humans and nature cannot be established if we tell people that they can't just become indigenous. If we don't understand that this is a path we can choose, then how is that relationship going to be reestablished? I did on purpose name the channel Becoming Indigenous, not Become Indigenous. I would not want to suggest you can just learn some things and do some things and now you are Indigenous. Now, if you want to define it that way, be my guest. But the title implies we are in a process of becoming Indigenous. And we may be in that process for many generations. Or maybe not. That depends, I suppose, on every person to say when they feel that they are now Indigenous. Or every community. But if we are in a process of many generations of becoming Indigenous, I'm good with that. But we have to start. We have to start reconnecting to the earth. We have to start reconnecting to nature. And similarly, with the word shaman, the idea is that a shaman is appointed by a community of people living indigenously who appoint someone their shaman, who recognize someone as their shaman. Do I have that community around me? Not really. Most of the people in the town where I live, the tiny, you can't even call it a village where I live, don't even know that I consider myself a shaman. But it is an identity which I try to embrace to the fullest. I try to give expression to the concept of shaman. You see, I think many people hold within them the medicine and the ability to connect to that part of themselves. But we all get to choose whether we give expression to that part of ourselves. And I don't encourage everybody to start calling themselves a shaman. This is about, do you have that calling? Do you feel that inside? In the end, whether you are a shaman is perhaps not something for you to decide on your own, but it is about a sacred connection you feel to Mother Earth. And I feel that connection. It is not about some human to appoint you. That's what I think. It is about you and your connection to Mother Earth, to God, to whatever you want to call it. But even beyond that, if we are going to transform this Western civilization back into a healthy way of life, if we are going to change the world and bring back harmony in the relationship between humans and nature, then we need to embrace that it is time to become indigenous again. Then we need to embrace that it is time for us to consciously choose to reestablish that connection. And that is what I, in trying to give expression to the concept of shaman, would like to inspire you to, would like to help you and guide you as best as I can. And that is what I am giving expression to in my daily life by doing ceremony, by saying prayer for dead animals, by doing what I can to connect to nature, to learn how to do that, and to figure out again, how can we as humans reestablish that connection with nature? How can we live in harmony and respect with nature? That's a tricky thing, figuring that out, especially because we were not born into a community or a people who have the long-standing tradition, but we can learn a lot from these people. But we can also learn from our own connection to nature. We can also learn from nature as our ancestors, as all peoples on the world have always done. By observing nature, we learn how life works. By following our intuition, we hear the voices of the divine. And by sitting with a tree, You feel something. Nature is our teacher. Nature helps us connect. And it is so important, particularly for people in the West, particularly for people who were not born into this, that we reconnect with nature. Because how else are we going to stop the destruction? I believe the only way to stop the destruction is that we on Earth choose to reconnect with Mother Earth, that we choose to respect nature. And so that is what I would love to recommend to you to do. And that is what I recommend myself to do. And that is what I try to figure out. How do we do that? But really, like I said, go into nature. Mother Earth is your teacher. It's not that difficult, really. It's about choice. It's about choosing to respect Earth. It's about choosing to respect nature. It's about choosing to reestablish a sense of connection. It's about going out into nature. It's about making choices in your life and checking, is this in alignment with respecting nature? It's really not that difficult. We just have to choose. So with that, I would say go out into nature, have fun, and I'll see you in the next video.